right, so I always start, I do talks for the police department on our history occasionally as well. I always start out with, we've done a poor job of keeping our history, our artifacts and things like that in the police department. The city, the police department itself, apparently it's not their job to do, so a lot of things got away, but in 2009 we're starting to prepare for the sesquicentennial. That's when I first met TJ, and we started looking around. We didn't have much of anything. We had the 2 officers who were killed in the line of duty, their photos and a plaque from the Harris Mansion robbery, and that's all we had. That came over here in '83 when we moved from with a city building to a standalone police department. So about 2010 or so, I started trying to find things. Our benevolent association had a few things. Individuals had some things, some retired folks, families, and eBay. Found things on eBay, and so for this, I'm calling this Robbery at Elmshade. Anybody know why it's called Elmshade? That's what the Harrises called their mansion, is Elmshade. I didn't know that until 2012 when I saw an invitation and said party at Elmshade. Let's see here. I've got to do some acknowledgments here. Lieutenant Bill Newman, as a paper for the U of I, in the early 70s wrote a historic view of the Champaign Police Department. He included the Harris Mansion robbery as part of his history. A lot of this is based on his research, which he did with a manual typewriter and the old-fashioned going places and getting it. There wasn't any computer stuff then. So Sergeant David Godwin was my first training officer, and he's also somebody who's kept our history up and saved a lot of artifacts that would have slipped away. Ed Johansson was another one who was in our darkroom when we had our own darkroom, and he put me onto a lot of photos. So we've still got every photo ever taken by the Champaign Police Department. So there's thousands of them, 40, 50,000 maybe. Of course, a lot of them are mug shots, but a lot of them are scenes, crime scenes, and then scenes just around town. So there's a tremendous amount of history in all those. I've gone through several of them, but I got a long way to go still. Again, retirees, I brought them in 2012 when we kind of formalized and we started bringing things in. I brought them in and burned them all out. I can't hardly get AM to come around anymore. So also TJ, Perry, everybody who donates to the museum and artifacts to the museum, because you're going to see over there a coat from our police department from 1920, worn by our first ever retiree. He was on the police department about 30 years. It's in really nice shape, and it was in the museum the whole time. And we've got some other artifacts too. PACA, thanking them for salvaging some of the panels with bullet holes in them from the Harris Mansion. And also Elise Harshbarger, they took a lot of photos as they were doing the deconstruction, and you'll see some of that now. And Richard Rayburn I met in 2012, and his sister Sandra Bidner's here today. I saw her come in somewhere. They have one of the pistols carried by the one of the robbers in the Harris Mansion robbery, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. And they loaned that to the museum just yesterday, so it's over there in display too. It doesn't get any better than that. That's a great artifact. So Harris Mansion was located where the pavilion is today. This would be from Prospect and Church looking southeast. Built by B.F. Harris II. They'd been around for a long time anyway, and owned quite a few properties in Champaign. 521, I think, properties in Champaign by the late 1880s. And the original Harris came in when there was hardly anybody here, and became cattle. He drove cattle back to Ohio, various places like that, and it just went on from there. And they went in banking and real estate. So BF2 is the one that started the mansion in 1905. He died in 1920, and Henry H., who I guess went by Harry, you see that in a minute, took over, and then they abandoned about 1931, and it became Cole Hospital then in 47. There's a lot of pictures. These are just a few of them, but it took up the entire half of the block, I think, you know, from Church to Park and on Prospect there. They had a lot of firsts too. First motor car, the first swimming pool in 1912 or something like that. But I mean, it was immaculate. 25 rooms. They searched far and wide for all the things that they ended up putting in it. So this is an invitation. In 1930, it'd be similar to the one for the night of the actual robbery. So they were still having parties a year later. And we have that actual artifact over at the museum too. We just got that recently as well. Ever since the mansion was built, according to what I've read, parties were almost every weekend. They had a ballroom on the 3rd floor, complete with a dance floor and bandstand. So they were having an after the game party, which they did after every game, I guess, 90 years ago from today. And that was only 10 days after the Black Tuesday stock market crash, but apparently it didn't affect them that quick. Population of Champaign was only 19,000, Urbana 13,000, and there were 65,000 at the game. Yeah, you can imagine. A few years before, when Grange was playing, I read somewhere they brought 200 Chicago Park District cops down to help with traffic. By this time, we have some stats too. They were bringing 30 down from Chicago, 15 and 30 from state police, and we had about 15 and 15 auxiliaries or whatever at the time for a game day. So, so these 5 bandits that the story's about met up in Decatur and hatched a scheme to come over here and rob everybody. This is an actual souvenir program from that day. I found it on eBay. It's over at the museum, so you can see it. I think he's going to have a slideshow with, you can actually look through the paper.
Not yet.
Yeah, okay. And that's a ticket from that day too. I'm surprised at the artifacts we've been able to find, including a picture that you just found. Shows the entire stadium on that day. Unbelievable. So there were 50 to 75 wealthy couples out there. They came from Chicago, New York, lots of places. These names are some of the victims of the robbery that I could get from the paperwork. Kaufman's downtown was that clothing store, I think? Okay. Mattis was a banker. Some of the other ones I don't really recognize, but there were a lot of people. I think Mr. Harris said that night that there were 150 guests, and of that, 80 or 90 of them were locals. Everybody else was from out of town, probably visiting for the game and things like that. The bandits, this is Harold Smith, also went by Tuscola Smitty. He was the first one arrested at the mansion, and he didn't like jail, so he escaped and was recaptured. We only started keeping criminal jackets or doing a jacket for somebody just a few months, I think, before this, and he's number 79. Prior to that, I think they kept him in a ledger, but this is when they first started. Fingerprints in there, the photos, and fortunately, some of the information that went along with the case. This is Carl St. Clair Wilson from Decatur. His left leg was wooden, and he was the driver of the getaway car. Bernie Katz, some kind of railroad operator. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but he made his way, but he was returned anyway. Clyde Henderson, also known as Cappy. I think from what I've been seeing that perhaps Cappy and then the next guy were the ones who kind of designed this thing. C.W. Catchman was shot and killed by Officer Gilbert Brown at the mansion during the robbery. And I think, from what I've been seeing, probably Catchman and Cappy Henderson were the ringleaders. These are the officers. This is the photo the next day. You notice the bandage on Davis's right hand. It's where he was shot in the belt buckle and deflected into his hand. And Gilbert Brown is wearing puttees. These things here, leggings. Is there another military term for those, or is puttees right? Yeah. I think that may have been to ride a motorcycle back then, I think. And we've still got a set of those puttees in our collection now. Again, this is Brown, and he'd only been in the department less than a year when this occurred. Davis had been on about 4 years. I said the plan, or actually lack of it. Smith had just spent 2 years in youth reformatory and gotten out earlier in the year. And he was the youngest. The rest of them were a little bit older, and a couple of them were 27, 28. So he'd known Cappy Henderson. Henderson picked him up in Tuscola and brought him to Decatur. A lot of this information comes from confessions from Smith and from Wilson. Wilson was picked up in front of the pool hall over there in Decatur, asking if he wanted to make some money, and he agreed. And there's two different stories here. In one of the confessions, it says somebody in the group had read about the party in the newspaper, and that's probably highly likely back then because the society news was out there. So and so is going to have this big party, and then afterwards pictures and everything about the party. So that's very believable. An alternate story is that some of the bandits were at the party at the Illinois game, and they heard about it. Well, that's possible too. The more I think about it, I don't think it was Wilson or Smith, which they picked up over there. I suppose a couple of them could have been over here and heard this. I don't know. There's no way to prove it now, one way or another. The only thing I kind of go by is the confession. But the guy who did the confession, Wilson, was picked up in Decatur, so he may not have known that these guys have been over there. Don't know. There was very little planning, according to the two people that confessed, and only Catchman seemed to know where the mansion was even located. So with roads the way they were, I'm just kind of doubting that they were at the party, went over back to Decatur, picked some people up and came back, but again, it's possible. So they all headed over to Champaign, and some of the versions say an Oldsmobile, some say a Buick. Guess it doesn't make much difference really, but they all got drunk on the way over here. They were all drunk by the time they got here, and knew nothing about the inside of the mansion. Had no idea where things were at, and it's a 25-room place, you know. I mean, huge, 3 floors. Wilson remained in the car, and the other 4 went in. They forced their way past the doorman, saying they were playing a joke, but they still stuck a gun in his ribs. They had rounded everybody up. I don't see how they could have rounded 150 people up all together, and they didn't. Obviously, a couple of them got out, but most of them on the 3rd floor and started taking all their jewelry and furs and stuff. Here's another place where the story might be a little bit different. Stanley Kaufman was either slow to raise his hands because the crowd, the partygoers, probably thought this was a joke because that's the kind of things that Henry Harris played. He would do things like that. And they probably weren't too worried. Or the alternate story is somebody was hiding jewels and stuff in the punch bowl, and they got smacked up. Somebody got smacked up upside the head, what's described as a shotgun, and it went off and cut Kaufman's scalp. And a witness to that was Virgil Lafferty. I'm sure some people in here remember Virgil. He was a mayor, 1950. But at that night, he was in the band, playing in the band, and saw this. And he was one of those who was still alive when Newman did his history to be able to talk to him. Newman was actually able to talk to several people who were there or related to the story. Not so these days. Everybody's pretty much gone. So a few of the guests slipped out. They called, and Clyde Davis and Gilbert Brown responded. Again, Davis had been an officer about 4 years and Brown less than a year. They asked the doorman what was going on. He said, well, you go in and find out for yourself. Yeah. And, you know, guests were still arriving, so they're like, they didn't know if it was a robbery or if it was some kind of a prank. So they headed up the staircase, and I've got some pictures here in a minute. And they got to the second floor when they ran into Harold Smith, armloaded furs. So he was arrested, handcuffed, and turned over to some guests. Davis started going up ahead of the stairs, a large staircase, and he ran into Catchman, who was coming down. Catchman was armed with a .35 caliber Remington pump rifle, which you'll see here in a little bit. It looks a lot like a pump shotgun, so that's probably why they're two different stories. I can see that easily. And they fought over the gun, and fortunately, when it went off, it hit the Sam Brown belt buckle, which is a heavy brass belt buckle, hit that and deflected into his right hand. It was just it wasn't his day to die. You know, that rifle would have been damaging if he got hit with it in the stomach or wherever. So I believe to the left is Church Street, the main entrance coming in off Church Street, and foyer type here, and that stair starts up there, continues in a square fashion up to the third floor. On the left there's a little short landing type thing, and then there's another landing, then a corner, and then we're headed on up. Still going up. Around the next corner is this next photo. I think that the fight occurred in this landing somewhere, and the panels with bullet holes in them came from that area. And the packet saved them, and have two of them over at the museum now. But I'm pretty sure that's where that happened. Then you go on around, you go up to the third floor, and that was where the ballroom was at. So hearing the shot, Brown came running up and shot Catchman. He fired 2 shots, so one of them missed, one of them hit him, and he died 2 days later. But before he died, he named all the accomplices, and so did Smith. The other two, Henderson and Katz, got away. They took loot with them and got out to the car and got with Wilson. And they drove, as Wilson explains in his confession, down through the country until they hit a hard road, which I'm assuming was 45 maybe at that time, and ended up down in Effingham. But between Champaign and Mattoon, Wilson was given $60 cash, a necklace, a wristwatch, and a lady's ring. And he threw the stuff away he thought was going to identify him. And Henderson took the wristwatch back. I don't know if he still had it later on. And Wilson also threw away some handbags they'd stolen, and they were wearing caps, coveralls, and they actually had bandanas on their face. Wilson had took the train from Effingham down to St. Louis, and the other two guys headed for California. So Wilson got to St. Louis, turned around, and came back, and a few days afterwards, Decatur went over and picked him up, brought him over, and then he confessed, and he also said where the other two had got to. They were in Los Angeles. I don't know any more specifics than that, but they were found fairly easily, apparently. And poor old Gilbert Brown had to end up going out there and bringing them back, him and another guy. That'd been a long trip in 29. I'm assuming on the train, bringing 2 back, you know. So they were all back in within 30 days, or the one guy was dead, of course. Estimates are up to 30,000. I saw one note in the file that early in January it said conservative was 10,000 and 4,000 had been recovered at that time. So I think they must have gone down and found some of the stuff out in the weeds wherever they were at, or got somebody with some stuff, because they got some of it back. There's some great historic pieces in here in some of these arrest jackets where they had grabbed letterheads from the mansion and wrote. I can just see an officer there writing out all the descriptions of the jewelry and furs and things like that. And they didn't have any paper. And some of the notes, there's one over there that's on Mattis Stationery, right?
Yeah.
I said Mrs. John Crawford visiting. I'm assuming she was visiting, and that's her list of stuff. This was another list. There's something there, about $8,000 there. And this, of course, this header here is the police department with Keller's name as chief on it and everything. That's a great piece. And then this was actually a wanted poster, I would call it, that was sent out, and it was still in there too. So some of that stuff I opened just about 3 weeks ago. Hadn't seen the light of day for 90 years. So it's like a time capsule. Okay, some of the weapons here. Again, this is Richard Rayburn. This was his mom at the time. Back in 2002, they did a newspaper article about having this this pistol here, this revolver. Richard's great uncle was Mayor Mulliken at the period when the robbery happened. So when he left, he took it with him, which is not uncommon back then. Officers kept weapons too. If they took them off somebody and there was no other use for them, they were given to the officer a lot of times. So this is not unusual. Badges went that way and everything else. Of course, that's why we don't have some of our history. But anyway, had it not gone to him and their family kept it, we wouldn't have it today. You know, it's not a spectacular piece. It's a relatively inexpensive Iver Johnson Arms and Cycle Works company. It's a .38 short. It would probably still shoot, but it probably shouldn't shoot modern ammunition in it. But it's a great collectible. You know, as it is to anybody else, it's not worth much, but to us and the family, priceless. You cannot replace it. And this is another picture of it. Depending on what light you use, it looks pretty good here. In real life, it doesn't look quite that. A little bit rust here and there in use. It was patented in 1909, I think it was. And this is C.W. Catchman's Remington rifle. This photo up here was a Polaroid taken in, I don't know, 72, 73 by Newman when he went over and visited Davis's widow in Danville. She pulled it out from underneath the couch. Said, here's the rifle he was shot with. And I said, oh, Newman, why didn't you try to get that or something? Because now it's gone to who knows where it's gone. It had a sling on it. And looking at that, you can't really tell what it is. But when you look the actual thing up, this is what it looked like. It looks to me like a Remington 870 quite a bit. But anybody could easily mistake that for a shotgun. But it's actually a .35 caliber rifle that shoots a bottleneck rifle shell. It'd be pretty powerful. Okay, after the shooting and the robbery, the Harrises gave Davis and Brown each one of these brand new Smith & Wesson revolvers, and they have their name engraved on them too. That one's G. Brown. The family still has that. And this is a picture of that revolver. He's posing with a bulletproof shield that we got probably in 36 or 37. This was a News Gazette photo at one time. A little bit about the Brown family. Brown's son Stan was a jet pilot in Vietnam. He took that revolver with him to Vietnam, and on the day of the Tet Offensive, he was on the ground on foot in Saigon, and that's all he had between the 5 or 6 of them that were there. And he called up his brother George, who was a helicopter pilot, and George says, I'll be there in an hour. He went and picked him up, got him out of harm's way. And it's like I say, the family still has that revolver, which is amazing. The Brown family's got all these U of I degrees, military officers, personnel commissioned out of ROTC, and 5 aviators. Stan and George both went on to be high-ranking military officers. They're both have passed now. Stan, I think, one of them or the other just passed a year or 2 ago, I believe it was. So one day I got an email with this on it, and it's from Gil Brown, who's a great-grandson of Gilbert Brown. And he said when they were cleaning out Stan Brown stuff, they found this. What this is, in the Depression years, the city, you voluntarily gave back voluntarily. Everybody working for the city gave back a certain portion. I don't know what the portion was, but for a 2-week period it was $11.25, and they scratched out this and put donated to the city, and it's signed by the Chief Roy Argo. So Gil wanted to, if he could get the money back. There were several of those, obviously. Well, my grandfather was a fireman from 20 to 50, and he never threw anything away. They took his money too. He had receipts for $345, and about 1985 or so, he went to the city manager and said, "I want my money back." Well, they did. They give him exactly $345, exactly what they'd taken back during the Depression, and that was it. But that's the way it goes. I've still got all his receipts too. It's just a nice thing from the Depression, you know, to have. So Sherman Gilbert Brown, no wonder he went by G. Brown or Gilbert Brown a lot. He became a lieutenant eventually and retired in '54. Clyde Rufus Davis rose to become the chief. He retired in '58. He was forced out due to alleged leaks in the department related to vice, gambling, prostitution, drug raids. Information was getting out, and by the time the police got there, everything was gone. It was all over with. After he left, and they determined later on it was not within the police department, it was somewhere else. So, but it was too late for him. He was gone. And let me see, I got one more. And this was presented in 1937. Falstaff was on a kick doing things for police departments, and they would do these plaques. They took criminal weapons, melted them down, and made these plaques, and we were presented that in '37 for heroism and valor during the Harris Mansion robbery. So, and that's pretty much the end of it. If you got any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Now you've heard the full story. Just a couple of quick things that I'll mention. So the receipt during the Depression about refunding money back, if you notice the date on that, it was March 1st, 1933. Keep that in mind. So in the exhibit across the street, we do talk about, of course, the Harris Mansion robbery. We talk about the fashion of the day, hold on, that's how I get it on camera. So we talk about the fashion of the day, but we also took the opportunity in the exhibit to expand on the topics a bit, and so we dive into the Depression and talk about those early years of the Depression, because of course, while Henry Harris wasn't part of the bank, his family certainly was, and they were the owners of First National Bank. So in the exhibit, you're going to see half the exhibit's going to be about the mansion robbery, half it's going to be about the Depression. But that March 1st, 1933 date's important. That was right at the time when FDR was being sworn into office and ordered the banks closed. And so it's not surprising that the city of Champaign would not, along with every business in town, would not have been able to make payroll because the banks would have been closed and wouldn't have been able to accept any withdrawals. And so you're going to see quite a bit of that in the exhibit as we kind of dive. You'll get to see what the city of Urbana did, a creative solution, Urbana Money. They created Urbana Money. You'll see that over there, and then you'll also see a number of items specifically from the Harris Bank, the First National Bank in Champaign, which was a recent acquisition to the collection. So, any further questions or questions about the museum? Either one, yes.
Why only 2 officers is sent to a place so large with so many persons?
As far as I can tell, that's the only 2 who were there. Remember, there's the football crowds in town too. So, but back then we only had about probably 15 officers altogether for the whole city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would have likely been working that full day shift, right? The game, I mean, 3 times almost the size of the community is here, with all those train loads, and here it is, the end of the night, almost 11 p.m. They probably had an exhausted day.
They were on 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
And they'd only had 4 hours sleep the night before. Yeah.
And at the time, too, the city didn't go much beyond Prospect. That was kind of the edge of town as well. So it also didn't have as much area to patrol, but still, I have to think that would have been an exhaustive day.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back. Somebody had their hand raised a second ago. Okay, we'll come back up here.
So is it true, though, that after the police took all the accounts and everything from people, that the party continued on?
Yes. Well, yeah, I just saw that in the newspaper.
Yeah. And in fact, over at the museum, you'll see the invitation. What's surprising is they didn't just carry on that night; they decided to have it again the following year. So they tempted fate. So we actually have the program from the the invitation from the 1930 party that was the following year. But interestingly enough, right after that 1930 party, the family left the house. Almost, it had to have been within a matter of months, and the house was abandoned in place, basically. And so, there's stories of home and beer and everything still in the house, and people would sneak in. It was almost a decade that the house was empty before Cole Hospital took over the space. And just to keep in mind, the amount that varies on what was stolen, but if it's translated to today's dollar, it's likely around $500,000 worth of jewelry and furs and cash that were taken. And the accounts are really remarkable. For instance, Mrs. Mattis, they were very descriptive. She lost this emerald necklace, this green emerald necklace, and matching solitaire diamond ring. And so they actually go through and list every specific item that they lost. So it's pretty interesting to see. And so we have a case on the fashion of the day. Of course, we don't have emerald jewelry in our case, but we give you a sense for what that would have been like. I saw some other hands. Monica?
Do we know how much time the robbers spent in jail, or what they were?
Oh yeah, they were all given 1 to life, and the majority of them spent at least 10 years. Smith came back to town and drove a taxi, I believe.
Well, I thought that was one of the most interesting. It's kind of a redemption piece. He, in that same file that Zane uncovered, was an application where I guess they were doing like a background check because he had applied to the city of Champaign to be a taxi driver, and so that piece of paper in the 1950s found its way into the jacket from their case file because obviously they went back and ran a check. We don't know though if he was successful in getting his taxi cab license.
I don't know.
I don't know.
No.
I don't know that those records exist. Yes.
So you do have a military presence when this incident took place. And I'm kind of curious to know how much of a role did the military play in trying to help capture these guys?
None that I know of. I'm sure there were some military brass at the party, but as far as anybody else, I don't think there was. I don't think they had any involvement really.
So the agencies that did get involved, though, the FBI got involved, the Chicago and LAPDs got involved a little bit in trying to track down identities and apprehension in Los Angeles.
Photos of one of them from his father in Chicago. Decatur picked 2 up and brought over, and like LA just picked the guys up and went and got them. I'd like to know a little bit more about the detail, but they knew where to find them.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't take very long, really.
Well, it isn't. The commander at Chanute was present at the party. There was a brigadier general that was present at the party. But what's interesting, I suppose it could have been worse. The dignitaries in attendance at that football game earlier in the day was exhaustive. So the secretary of the Army Chief of Staff was in town. The commander of the 4th Army was here. The governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, comptroller, 6 Illinois Supreme Court justices were all in attendance at the game. We actually have pictures. Division of Intercollegiate Athletics has given us, they found 20 pictures from that game, so you'll see some of those dignitaries at the game. We had 2 U.S. senators at the game. Everyone was at this game. It was incredible. So it is interesting that at least a few of those didn't somehow know the Harrises and get an invite to that party. I mean, this could have been a lot different story had the governor of the state of Illinois or the U.S. or the Secretary of War actually been dancing in the ballroom. So it was a busy day around town. Yeah.
Why was the home abandoned? Did they fall on hard times with the Depression?
Well, that's something that we're still trying to figure out. I don't have a good answer for that. Although I didn't realize until we were doing the research for the exhibit, Henry Harris, H.H. Harris, was only 20 years old when this party happened. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh, he's working. But he owned Alloy Casting, which then went out to there at Glen Park Drive. He moved his alloy company, which he owned at the age of 20, from Boston to Champaign. So he wasn't. It doesn't seem like he was going to be part of the banking part of the family. And so he was on his own to do his own thing. but he lived in a home with his mother. So B.F. Harris II, or Frank Harris, had died in 1920, and his widow still lived in the home. And they're all listed in the city directories as living in the home, but then in 1930, over to a caretaker. And so that's the question. It could have been, I suppose, that there wasn't the money to keep the house up. That certainly would have made sense, especially if he wasn't going to be a president at the bank and the family wasn't supporting him in that way. I don't know. But it is an interesting question that would, if anyone has ideas or is able to research, I'd like to know that, because this huge house, probably the most opulent house in Champaign, just closed up and went silent for almost a decade.
I have another question.
Yeah.
There used to be a beautiful white house down on Church Street. You remember what I'm talking about? They tore it down a few years back.
The Burnham Mansion. So just the one that just came down last year.
So that wasn't a Trevitt home.
It was the Burnhams and the Mattises, or the Burnhams and the Harrises were part of the same group. Yes, so it was a Harris home. There was the home. There was, of course, B.F. Harris, the one we're talking about today. There was the Philippi Mansion, which was the old YMCA. That was the daughter, B.F. Harris's daughter, who married a Philippi, and that home was actually where the original B.F. Harris had his home. That home came down. They built the Philippi Mansion. That was his daughter's home. I think it was a wedding gift. The home that, if anyone remembers, the Fleetwood building at the corner of Elm and Church Street, it was a one-story office building. Some of you might have learned dance at the Thelma Lee Rose class. Isn't that it? Was that it? Thelma Lee Rose? So that was in that house. It was a beautiful home that sat there. That was another basically, most of the mansions along Church Street, they were all from the Harris clan. Yeah.
Well, they were interconnected with the Trevitt family.
Absolutely. Then you had the Mattises and the Trevitts on the park, and
You can just follow the families.
and we saw Stanley Kaufman. So Stanley Kaufman was a young man at this time. His house is still standing on University Avenue, the beautiful Kaufman Mansion. He was a young man too. His father had passed away earlier in the 20s, and he had taken control of the Kaufman department store. Of course, George and Elsie Mattis. Hal has their house there on Park Street, at Park and Prospect, their beautiful home that's on the National Register. And so I assume a lot of the guests were a lot of neighbors as well. And so because most of the wealth in town was on University and Church Streets. Yeah. Way in the back. Oh, I don't know. I'm going to look to Melissa. Melissa, do you happen to know if the Harrises have roots in Virginia, in the state of Virginia? Did they come that direction?
I think they did.
Yeah.
I think they come from out that way.
Okay. I mean, everybody kind of comes from that way at some point, but could be. Of course, B.F. Harris has relationship to the cattle bank as well. He was perhaps not a. There's lots of questions surrounding it, but we actually have B.F. Harris's bank book and in a case over at the museum because of his involvement. But of course, the family started First National Bank, which was the big bank at Walnut and Main Street. That was truly the first nationally backed bank in the town. So, yes, Louis.
Is B.F. Harris related to Mr. Harris, who was around when I was a kid? He was a prominent person in that, and he really and truly was both friends, very low water. Do you know about that?
I would guess that's probably true.
Is it the same person?
What's that, Melissa?
Unless there's two separate Harris.
No, I think. I would guess that's probably true. They were the third. You think that was BF the third? Yeah.
One time he told me that my son was very told me to talk to Goldwater on the phone last night. My dad was ready to kick me to the same minute. He didn't know that I not really I've got bad news for you. He really is a close friend with Gary Goldwater.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. The Harrises were well-connected. Were a well-connected family. They were one of the most prominent in the community, and it stretched all the way back to Lincoln's day. Any other questions? Yes, Megan. Oh, that's a good. Whose dog was that with Gilbert and?
Not a clue.
No.
Not a clue. No.
Nice dog.
Don't know where the picture was actually taken either.
Yeah. All right. Well, so it's going to get a little crowded across the street. I'm not going to lie. We're going to run over and take a quick photo op. We stretched a ribbon across the door, and we'll cut that just so we can get people in. But there is food upstairs, so if some of you want to peel off and go upstairs and have some snacks, there's also the exhibit, our U of I or our World War II exhibit still up. You can meander back to the back. You can hang out in the lobby. And Rick?
There's also some
Oh, yeah.
here to take a look at.
That's right. There's
Maybe some of you should go back here first before you come across.
absolutely. If you want to stick around for a few minutes, Zane's put some items out on the table in the back, which are great police history items. Anything else, Zane?
There's some stuff about the Harris Mansion and
Okay.
some of the things we talked about.
Well, let's give Zane a real quick round of applause before we're... All right, we will meet you all across the street. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.